Good day, friends. Welcome to Our Power is Within podcast. I'm your host, Chasmith, and my mission for this podcast is to inspire you to take your power back and to realize that you are the healer and the creator of your life that you have been looking for all along. So, this week's challenge might be a challenging one for some of us out there, but the more resistance that you might find yourself in toward this challenge, the more I actually challenge you to take it on. Seriously, there is so much noise in the world, like literally information overload, that are like all this information that is coming into our minds at lightning speeds as we scroll Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and even listen to podcasts. Yep, I said it. Look, everything I just mentioned, they're tools and they can be used for good and they can be used in a way that harms us. And I can admit that there are times when I am so overwhelmed by all the information overload that I feel like I just need to turn my phone off, turn the TV off, and turn the radio off and just hide in my room in silence. I often wonder how it's even possible to connect to our own inner knowing and our own inspirations if we're always taking in everyone else's opinions, beliefs, and actions and information all around us. So, my challenge for you this week is to simply start experiencing what it might be like if we cut out some of the noise and commit to yourself a 24-hour social media fast. Yes, that means no Instagram, no Facebook, no TikTok, no Snapchat, no Telegram, and no whatever else is out there in the social media platform world. Um, I would honestly even challenge you to go as far as saying no YouTube and no podcasts. But of course, after you finish listening to this one. um, but doing that for a full 24 hours. I'm curious, when was the last time you did take a full 24 hours off of everyone else's input to check in with your own? Who knows? Maybe you do this and you realize that it is so potent and valuable that you decide to dedicate one day a week media free. I think this could be a really valuable experiment and I hope that you will participate. And if you do, please let me know how it goes for you. So, our guest today is Nellie Barnett. Nellie has a very in-depth understanding of the knowledge that GNM and GHK offers us into the inner workings of our bodies and the language of our body, which you might know as symptoms. Today, she shares several personal stories of how this knowledge has supported her on her own healing journey, as well as many fun insights into the world of GNM GHK. And we even get into the concept of fasting and how this can support someone's inner work journey. Although, keep in mind, she does preface and explain that fasting is not for everybody. So, please don't hear this episode and just go out and do a long fast on your own without doing proper in-depth research and making sure that it's right for you. And just as a reminder, in case you are new to this podcast and new to the term GNM GHK, it does stand for German New Medicine and Germanic Healing Knowledge. And if this is a new concept to you and you want to understand more about its basics, look to the show notes and there'll be some episode options where we dive into GNM GHK 101 and give you some broader understanding of what that entails. For now, let's go ahead and welcome Nellie to the show. All right, Nellie, thank you so much for being here with me today. I am so excited for this conversation.
So welcome. I'm very excited as well. Thanks for having me, Chasmith.
Absolutely. So I think the way I usually like to start things out is kind of just open the floor for you to share a little bit about yourself, your background, and really what I'm really curious about is how you became interested and so immersed in the world of German New Medicine and Germanic healing knowledge yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So this is always a really interesting question because like Germany medicine has been in my world for about 7 or 8 years now. So I think it was, what was it? 20, it's been 20, I can't even remember when I found it 7 years ago. What's that? My maths is not great. GNM's great, maths not great. So whatever that is, but I always say like 7 or 8 years, but then actually when I look at it, I've kind of been in this industry and the holistic health world almost a lifetime. Like I remember when I was a kid, just not resonating with medications, just feeling like something wasn't right with the system. And like that was always there in me right from very, very young. And then when I went through I had a pretty rough like teens emotionally. And then I think one of the pivotal moments for me was I met a guy when I was like 17 and he was 11 years older than me. Um, and I pretty much literally went overnight from like a straight A every Sunday church going, really quiet, good girl to pretty much sex, drugs, and rock and roll overnight with this guy. And I was thrown into this really crazy world. And through that process, like it actually ended up being a very abusive relationship. Um, and I basically, by the end of that relationship, was about 2.5, 3 years. I was in the depths of pretty much a suicidal depression. And that was, I'd had like really interesting, like smaller ones the whole way along, smaller kind of depressions. And I'd always been a pretty emotional being, but it got hectic at the end of this relationship. And that was what prompted me. So I was 19 then, 19 going on 20. And that's when I really started looking into personal development, personal growth, like really trying to understand my brain and myself. I remember going to the doctor and being like, I don't want to be here. I'm in some kind of depression, but I also don't want to take medication. What can you recommend? And he didn't really have a lot for me. I think he put me on to like St. John's wort or something, which is like a herbal remedy. But I was kind of like, okay, you guys aren't going to do anything for me. So I sort of took matters into my own hands and just really started delving into the mind. The very first thing that I came across, actually, it's really interesting. This came up in conversation the other day with a girlfriend. The very first thing that happened for me was a friend gave me a book called Girlosophy. I don't know if you guys have it in the US or whether you've come across it, but it's just a book of like really inspirational quotes, sayings, paragraphs, poems, writings, and beautiful pictures to go with it. Really, really invigorating, inspirational, motivational text. And I remember when I got these books, there was 2 in the series, and the first one, I read the entire book in one night, and I just cried and cried and cried and cried and cried, and basically cried out like 3 years of abuse and grief was starting to strip away the layers. And then I ended up rereading the book and I wrote out every piece that really meant something to me. And then I read the second book. That was the very start of my personal development journey and coming to understand the mind. And then from there, like I sort of started uphill from there, and I went through some other interesting things in life. And then throughout sort of my 20s and 30s, I experienced another few kind of, like depression states. And each time I got more conscious about how I wanted to pull myself out of those. So one of those times actually took me into studying and becoming certified in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And that was originally like a personal thing that I wanted to do. But it's really interesting because that's ended up becoming a big part of, the work I do now as well, integrated with Germany medicine. So there's all these little steps along the way that are kind of like stepping stones that were always there in my path towards where I am and what I'm doing now. And then it was around, I did some other certifications in between. And then, when I discovered Germany medicine, so 8 years ago, so I reckon it must have been about 2015. And there we go, my maths is catching up now. And somebody actually, I was kind of in another bit of a funky state. My body wasn't coping very well. I wasn't diagnosed with anything, but I just felt like my body was not working. And I went to see a friend of my partner's for a kinesiology session. And in that session, we also spoke about juice fasting, which is also now a part of the work I do. And he just dropped this little seed right at the end of their session. He basically said, "Have you heard of German New Medicine?" And I was like, "No, what's that?" And he gave me this tiny little snippet of what it was. And it was instant for me, like an instant drop in the body. I was like, I describe it like it felt like I was coming home. It felt like somebody had finally put a language to everything that I had intuitively known my whole life. And I knew there was this massive calling in my soul. I knew I had to follow that seed. And I jumped right into basically self-study of German New Medicine. There was not very much education readily available at that point in time, particularly like I didn't know anyone else in Australia who was basically even knew about it or doing anything with it. So lots of self-study. And then I ended up getting into some networks in the US and Canada and studying through quite a few people, a few different teachers, some who had been first-hand students of Dr. Harmer and some who had carried on work from there. And yeah, so then shortly after that, I completed my first fast. So I fasted for the entire month of February. And that completely changed my life. And in that time, I was studying German New Medicine, learning about it. And it just, my whole world changed. Like it was a complete game changer for me. My body changed, my mind changed, everything changed. And out of that capsule, actually, my business was born as well. So that's kind of how I got to here now. Like I said, lots of little stepping stones along the way, following the breadcrumbs of just where I'm meant to be and what I was meant to be doing, and the little golden threads. So yeah, that's the story of me in like 5 minutes to date.
It was really, it was very well said. And I'm so curious. So you said that the fasting for an entire month changed your life. And I'm curious in what ways and how and what your experience was like, because that's a real big commitment.
Yeah, it was for sure. And it was the fast, but I also believe that it was the work, like the study that I was doing in Germany medicine as well. So it was two. It was the fast was facilitating a lot of things on a physical level. And then what I was learning and implementing with the knowledge of Germany medicine was really going to work on an emotional, mental level as well. And, then that ripples through the biology too. But how did it change my life? I let go of 13 kilos in a month to begin with. And I just felt like I completely reset my body and mind system. So, yeah, just like physically, obviously, big external changes. I had a bit of a Britney Spears moment at the end of it and shaved off all my hair because I just had this overwhelming feeling of like, I don't want this old information on me anymore. So, shaved off all the hair. And about 2 or 3 days before I finished the fast, I remember I had one day where it was just complete emotional, mental breakdown to break through. So I literally just cried in bed the whole day. And I remember writing down everything that was still in my mind, that was still challenging me, that I still felt triggered by, that I still felt emotion around. And I just wrote and wrote and wrote everything that I could remember from my life. And that kind of became, I guess, a roadmap for what I worked with over the coming years in terms of my own personal development and sort of stripping away those layers. So, yeah, it just completely changed the way that my body felt. It reset everything, and it completely changed the way that my mind started looking at things and feeling about things as well. So yeah, it was a pretty big commitment, like a month. I just ran straight into it. But the fast, and I just fell in love with fasting. So a fast can facilitate so many different things. Like it gives so much space on the physical level because our body it's no longer digesting, no longer has the job of digestion. So it can go to work, healing and sorting things out and really getting stuck into things. And it also gives a lot of space on the mental, emotional level too, because food has become such an addiction for so many people. It's such a crux, it's something we go to for a lot of comfort. I believe we eat far more than we need to for survival. Um, and so it gives, because again, that's not happening. Like we're literally not pushing things down with food. It gives a lot of space for that emotional, mental subjects to rise. And that's where then we can work so powerfully with German medicine to look at those conflicts, look at those traumas, and start the resolution process, which then results in that biological program resolution and symptom resolution. And because we're not eating, the body has lots of time and space to sort that out on a physical level too. So does that make sense about how that kind of intertwines?
It does, absolutely. And so, did you do a juice fast or like a water fast?
I did a juice fast that time. So that was 4 weeks of, strictly cold pressed juices. And there was quite a bit, like there were quite a few days in there where I just didn't feel like juice. So I just had water. So there was technically some water fasting in there. And then I've done several smaller juice fasts since, and also a 16-day water fast, which again was phenomenal and just like a whole nother layer again. um, so yeah, pretty big experiences, pretty amazing.
And you didn't even prepare for that. Like a lot of people suggest that you cut certain foods out of your diet and you do certain things to prepare for extended fasts, even, 3 to 5 day fasts.
Mm,
So
yeah.
that you don't have those all that pain from like withdrawals of like the glucose and well, I guess you're getting it at least still in the fruit, but how did you get any kind of like detox like pain or symptoms come up in your body?
Yeah, so a little bit. So my tough patch was about a week in. I found it quite difficult. There were some headaches, but nothing, nothing like crazy, nothing super drastic. And having now guided, hundreds of people through the same process, I find that it's just so different for everyone. And we do prepare. So I did do a bit of preparation in that fast as well. So I did just start kind of cleaning up the diet for a few weeks beforehand. Um, and just being a bit more conscious about what I was eating. But I didn't go all out, but I do now. Part of what I guide through clients through now is definitely a preparation phase prior to the fasting, and a bowel detox kit as well, which I did too. So that kind of cleans out the insides, scrubs them out. So
Mhm.
yeah, I just find it so different for everyone. Like some people who actually have a clean diet can have really gnarly detox symptoms and really gnarly symptoms in those first few days or that first week. And then some other people who really don't have a great diet sort of cruise through it and have nothing. So this is, down to the individual. And I wonder, like where my mind goes as well, but knowing German new medicine is that, what is it doing on that level? So what are we, potentially someone's going into healing phases in that first week through the fast. So if somebody's not in active conflict, they might not have severe, what we call detox symptoms, because potentially they're not detox symptoms, potentially they're biological programs that are resolving.
Right.
Um, so, that's where we really start. The whole thing is about looking at the individual. There's no blanket approach to health and healing, I believe. It's so individualized because it's based on the individual's experiences and the way that the individual perceives those experiences and so many other factors. um, so, yeah.
So cool. Yeah, and I'm curious what your thought is on this because there are some schools of thought that suggest that doing and I say detox in quotations, but doing intense forms of like detox, like juice fast or water fast. There's a lot of people that believe that if we do this when we're actually already dysregulated in our nervous system, that it can be harder on us. Do you
Yeah.
have any experience with this with yourself or clients?
Yeah, I'd agree with that statement if it's not done properly, for sure. And so this is why I'm a massive advocate for having some kind of guide, especially in your first fast, because it's really important to prep the body. It's really important to prep the mind and make sure that the mind and the body are on the same page and they know what's going to happen. Because the other risk here, right, is if we're running into a fast unprepared and unguided, again, from a German new medicine perspective, we risk setting off things like starvation conflicts or existence conflicts, or all these different conflicts that, if we don't have the mind properly prepared and in the right place, these things can happen. So yeah, to some extent, I agree with that. It's not for everyone, but I do believe that when it is prepared for properly and guided properly, that there's most candidates can achieve it successfully.
Hmm. How do you personally assess, like with your clients, if it would be appropriate for them?
Sure. So I do look at things like body weight, how much excess fuel does the candidate have? Seasonal factors, like I don't think it's a great idea to fast during winter because we get quite cold. So here in Australia at the moment, we're coming into winter, so I'm not really focused on fasting at the moment in terms of clients and that sort of thing. But, US, America, Canada, you guys ready to roll? Um, and so, yeah, seasonal, body weight. I will take into like my intake form. I ask things like thyroid and adrenals and cortisol and where your hormones at. And also, if there's a history of eating disorders, is another important one. So I ask for quite a thorough medical history when I'm looking at candidates to understand, what biological programs they might be running, what constellations they might be running, which, if you're not familiar with German New Medicine, constellations is the term for mental health challenges. So yeah, just lots of different things. Again, like I said, it's always down to the individual and on a case by case scenario.
Yeah, and I was thinking, so, and then you're there to kind of be a support for them through it, correct?
Correct.
As
Yeah.
needed.
Yeah.
And how then would you handle if you felt like somebody was potentially going to go into like a starvation conflict or any other conflict to be activated through it?
Yeah, so that will generally show up like in my intake form. I've got some specific questions around
Hmm.
things like that. And then obviously we have like a pre chat and we have one on ones each week. So I would be speaking with them during the first week. So really it's about like looking at previously where they have potentially experienced something in the realm of starvation and how they handled that, and looking at, perhaps a resolution around that, and really just preparing the mind. Like it's consciously having the person understand and direct their psyche that they can choose to eat food at any point in time during this journey, but they are choosing not to for a very specific reason. So it's not that food is not available or love is not available or support is not available, because starvation can be perceived in many different ways. Let's remember, it's not necessarily just food. So all those things are available to them. They're just choosing not to consume food at the moment. And then, yeah, if anything comes up around like, any kind of fear around not having something that they need, we work through that when and if it comes up. And that can be really powerful. That can be a resolution and a shedding of lots and lots of different things.
So cool. I love it. I love learning about this. Um, so yeah, because you're like the first person in that's using like German new medicine, Germanic healing knowledge that I've spoken to that also has this foundation of fasting and using
Mm,
it in congruence, which is really cool to hear
it's a
the relationship.
Yeah, I believe it's a really, really powerful duo. Like it's a super powerful combo because like I said, the fasting gives so much space and clearance on a physical level.
Hmm.
And also that mental level, like things just become so emotionally and mentally clear on a fast.
Right.
Yeah, so we can
Yeah.
work really powerfully.
Yeah. I mean, especially if you are somebody who eats for comfort and you're not having
Yeah.
that crutch, and also just until we do any kind of fast, even just like a 3-day fast, it's like we have no idea how much food rules our entire life and how we're constantly thinking about it and thinking about what the next meal is going to be and what we're going to eat. Like
Yeah,
it's really taken up space, this idea of food in
absolutely.
your mind.
Totally. Yeah. Have you fasted before? You sound like you might have done.
I've done I've experimented with like a series of weekly 24 to 36-hour fasts.
Yeah, cool.
I've done a lot of intermittent fasting, which I know is not the same, but still good for the digestive system
Yep,
to take a
absolutely.
break. And then I've done a 3-day fast and a 5-day juice fast.
Super cool. Yep, that's great. How'd you go with your 5-dayer?
I hated it.
Perfect.
um, I really felt so tired, like, and fatigued.
Yeah.
Now, here's the funny thing. I totally did it over Christmas in the winter. I don't think the situation was necessarily like the most optimal situation, and I didn't really have any kind of like support. And
Yeah.
I definitely think it wasn't the right, just the right overall environment for it to be the most successful. But I just remember feeling the whole time like, why am I doing this to myself?
Yeah,
Like,
right.
this is so dumb. Why do I do these things? Like, yeah, but I got through it, but I was definitely tired. I think mostly I just wanted to sleep to avoid thinking about being hungry.
Yeah. Do you know, like what you've just shared is actually something I hear so commonly. It's a really, really common, I don't want to say mistake, but maybe assumption that you can just like roll in to a fast, like
Mhm.
just roll in and do it. And it doesn't, sometimes you can pull it off, but it often doesn't work out well because of all the things that we've just spoken about, like preparing for it mentally, preparing for it physically, probably not doing it. Like winter's not the best time to do it.
Mm-mm.
Prepare yourself, create some space around it. I get my clients to kind of clear their calendar as much as they can, and all these little things. And the other really important part, actually, that just came to mind then as you were speaking about that is the break fast. So the break fast, from my experience, can make or break the fasting journey. It's another massively important part of the fasting process. Like I think people actually underrate how important the doing a break fast properly is. And yeah, I've actually like worked with people and had to refast people who ran into a fast themselves and then broke it not in a very great way, and then ended up with issues and complications because they didn't break their fast properly. And so then we've had to
Mm.
go back and refast and redo the process and reset the body again. And hands up, total disclosure, I completely stuffed up my first break fast as well. I did not listen to my coach at the time. I just like, yeah, did all the wrong things, but I now have a really brilliant experience to tell my clients like what not to do.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, what's the one thing I would say that was really interesting for me was um to notice that I wanted to sleep to dodge the sensations of hunger,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But like that, like how you do anything's how you do everything, and like
Hmm.
that really does correlate to noticing where in my life I want to sleep to avoid my feelings,
Yes, absolutely.
you know?
Yeah,
um
totally.
and to avoid hard stuff, so it's there's still always something to be learned through any experience.
Yeah, look, self-awareness is,
Mhm.
a beautiful, beautiful thing. That's one of my, so
Mhm.
superb self-awareness and radical self-responsibility are two of my core principles that I teach and try to live by. And
Yeah.
that's what you've just expressed there is like self-awareness. It's like, oh yeah, I see that I do this, not just
Yeah.
in the fast, but in life. One of the
Mhm.
questions I also tend to ask clients on a fast when they say that they're hungry. First of all, I say, do you feel like you're going to die right now if you don't eat? And most of them say no. So I'm like, okay, so you're not starving, you're not physically starving. And then, so if we know that you're not physically starving, what are you hungry for?
Mhm.
And that question often opens up Pandora's box in terms of emotional starvation. So it's often things like attention or love or, um, understanding of self or self worth. It's so many different things there. But yeah, like superb self awareness and radical self responsibility is where it starts. That's, for me, I believe that's where everything starts when it comes to creating an optimal state of health.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's interesting because if you look even through the lens of GNM, well, I know, and speak of self awareness, I know it's like, okay, well, I also know that I tend to feel fatigue often, and I tend to feel fatigue during periods where I feel like I have decisions to make and I'm almost dodging making those decisions because I'm
Mm,
stuck in this idea that there's a right decision and a right path versus a wrong path.
yeah.
And when you look through that lens of GNM, there's like a, what's the conflict? It's like a path conflict, like right path conflict or something. What is
Yeah,
that?
there's the
Um,
overwhelm
yeah, the
conflict.
overwhelm,
Um,
which has to do with like feeling like you made wrong decisions or you're not on the right path.
yeah.
And that can lead to fatigue. And so
Mm,
it's like
yeah.
it all connects, you know?
Totally,
Um,
yeah. And also just from a like a psychological point of view, like the weight of making the psychological weight of feeling like you have to make the decision and going back and forwards between it is often way more than the actual thing itself. So the
right.
energy that we're using to go, is this right or this wrong, or which way? Oh my god, ooh, brain overload is sometimes way more than just going, okay, I'm doing that and let's see what happens. And so one of my
Right.
favorite sayings there is like, there is no failure, only feedback. So there is no wrong path. You just pick one and you get feedback from that path. And the feedback might be, this is really good. This is working out well. Sweet. We'll continue down this path. Or the feedback back might be, this is really crap. I don't want to be going down this path. So this is the point where I turn around and I try the other path. But it's all just feedback, right? It's not failure. And I find that
Right.
that really helps in that decision making process as well.
I like that. I like that feedback instead of failure. It's a good one. Okay, so Nelly, what we've been talking a lot about like the fasting and all that stuff, and you already explained how the combination of studying the GNM and the fasting is what really was a catalyst for change in your life.
Mm,
So, what were some of the ways early on that GNM did help you through healing?
sure. Um, so, not necessarily this one's a healing, but one of the biggest impacts that GNM had on my life was changing the way that I parent. So, I realized that I guess what GNM taught me was that we have quite a responsibility when we know GNM, because we understand that the way that we behave and speak to people can potentially set off conflicts. Now, radical self responsibility, it is always up to the individual about how they perceive that communication or perceive that event. But when we're talking things like kids, they're not necessarily at that point of that self responsibility and that self awareness. And so the way that we interact and speak to and behave with our children can have a massive impact on their health and well being. So Germany medicine really changed things there for me in terms of how I parent. I really became a lot more patient and really tried to soften how I parented, I guess. Not in a walk all over me, got no boundaries way, but just in a way that was not inviting massive conflict. So opening them up much better communication lines with my daughter. That was definitely a big impact that learning GNM had on my life. And then I have for a lifetime suffered with lots and lots of different musculoskeletal pain. So lots of neck pain, back pain, shoulder pain, all that sort of thing. And again, through the Germany medicine lens, there were massive changes there. So the musculoskeletal system responds to what we call self-devaluation conflicts, which is basically anything where you perceive you have not been enough in some way. So we've got, fast enough, strong enough, smart enough, good enough, all the enoughs. So the musculoskeletal system responds to self-devaluation, and then it's got all the different sub-themes through the different parts of the body. So, for example, the neck is self-devaluation in the realm of emotional or academic intelligence. The lower back is self-devaluation in relationship to feeling overburdened, overwhelmed, completely shattered, unsupported, that sort of thing. So when I looked at all these different themes that were going on and showing up in my body, again, that was it opened such a brilliant and beautiful pathway for me to explore where I was basically not valuing myself and not bringing my full worth to the table or not feeling like I was worthy. And so that exploratory journey in resolving those sorts of things obviously had a massive impact on how I felt physically because I was able to resolve a lot of pain programs, but also it had a massive impact on my life in general as a person because I stepped into taking responsibility for how I perceived things and how I thought about myself and how I felt about myself. And I increased my sense of self worth, self love, self value. So that impacted, my career, my partnership, my parenting, again, my friendships, just every element of life was impacted by that journey that was instigated by the theme that my symptoms gave me to work on, which is one of the things I love about German New Medicine is that the themes are they're so clear, they're there, and we can use them to create a physical resolve, but they also have a massive impact on our personal evolution and our lives, which is super cool. It's like a double win, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a couple of ways. And then I guess like the really sort of big pivotal convincer moment for me was heads up, there's going to be a bit of a TMI share here, too much information for some people, but I had a really gnarly case of thrush for about 2 years running. And it started when we moved into the house where we are now. And so I knew the basis of the conflict. I knew that it had to do with a sexual conflict that I had experienced when I was around age 6, but I couldn't quite find the nuance of the relationship of what the real shock piece had been for me. And so for 2 years, I explored this experience that I had had and the different ways that I perceived it and the different things that had made it mean. Dealt with thrush for pretty much 2 years straight. I was so stubborn. I was like, I'm not taking medication for this. I want to work it out. And there was this light bulb moment, and I remember it so clearly. And I actually got in contact. I got in touch with the mother of someone who was involved in this circumstance. And something completely unraveled. It was something in her communication that basically I felt my whole body shift in that moment. And I knew that there was no conflict in my body anymore. But that had been completely resolved, finalized, wrapped up. It was a massive relief. And I didn't really think too much about it at the time. But a few days later, my partner kind of asked how I was going. And I was like, oh my God, it's gone. Like it's completely gone, just totally gone. There was no sign of it whatsoever, the thrush anymore. And I have never had a bit since. Like it totally wrapped up. I've not had a sign of it since. And so I just knew in that moment that one was completely finalized and wrapped up. And it was so spot on with the GNM theme. And even though I had already been working with German New Medicine for a few years, that was definitely my like total clarity, totally convincer moment, was actually feeling that very visceral shift in my body and then witnessing obviously the physical changes after that. And again, like I was taken on this beautiful, amazing self-exploration and resolution and healing journey through the theme that was attached to that symptom. Like I not only got relief from the symptom, but I got relief from something that had been weighing me down and impacting my life for nearly 30 years.
Wow.
So that was definitely one of those moments for me. So a couple of big ones just to, share some real time goodness there.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because sometimes when we're stuck in, chronic illness or when we're dealing with chronic pain, we get so hyper focused on thinking that if just the pain would go away, I'd
Mm,
be so happy without realizing how it's always so much more than just the pain. There's a
Yeah.
reason that the pain or sickness is there.
Yeah.
And how you said you were able to like not only release this like case of thrush, and that was probably so much relief, but you let go of something that in a sense your body, your mind had been holding on to for a lifetime.
Oh yeah, like so
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, like something much bigger. And the way that that was
Right.
impacting my life in so many levels as well, like being able to completely resolve that is huge. Like I still
Yeah.
get goosebumps now thinking about it, and just yeah, what it's meant to be able to let go of that. Or actually, I don't even like. There's something come up recently. I don't actually like the term "let go." um, I don't really resonate with letting go of things. I actually prefer to say like let in. So, can we let in all of our experience? Can we let in the full spectrum of everything that we've been through and felt? And can we let in the full spectrum of our emotions and our experiences and all these things? And can we own them completely and fully? And that's again where we take that radical self responsibility. And by complete ownership and letting it all in, then we can make a conscious choice to move forwards. Whereas I find like with the term letting go, there's almost a sense of loss, which sometimes the psyche doesn't like, and it might not want to let go of something. It might not want to lose something. So yeah, just a little side note. I've been kind of switching terminology there lately, to letting in as opposed to
Mm.
letting go.
I love that. I really love that. And it's so like language we know is so powerful. So
So
yeah,
powerful.
how our subconscious is perceiving or responding to certain language does play a huge difference. And yeah, I could see that. Like I could see somebody having an experience and being like, "Wait, but I don't want to like let go or forget about this," cuz truthfully every experience we have is actually a part of us.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. That's
So,
my view too. And so we don't really necessarily want to let go of these parts of us, but we want to let them in and feel them and acknowledge them for what they were in the moment, and then make a really empowered choice to be able to move forwards with that knowledge, with that experience, but in a happier, healthier way.
I love that so much. I also want to point out, like for people listening, uh, I'm guilty of this. Like we learn about something, like say German new medicine, we're like, yeah, cool. Like I have the knowledge, and now I know what I need to do to heal. And then we want it now. We want it right now. And we think
Yeah.
it should all happen in the now. And I just wanted to point out, like, it took you 2 years and you knew in depth about this body of knowledge. And it
Yep.
still took you 2 years of doing inner work and exploration to get to the actual resolution of this one conflict. And
Yeah.
um I just love that because I mean, I don't love that it took you so long, but I do love that there's realness to that and that you like while we would love to think that German new medicine is just cut and dry, like, oh, this is this conflict, and you just find that exact situation and boom, it's done. It's like, no, maybe there's a situation you had and you do have to explore it from different angles because from what I've understood is like you and I could both go through like the same life situation and the conflict that you end up in could be so vastly different from the conflict that I end up in because of different perceptions.
Correct. Yeah. It's
And
all based
so,
on, yeah, perspective.
yeah. And so, like, when we're looking into like things that happened to us a lifetime ago, it's not so cut and dry and so easy to just be like, oh, well, that happened and it was this specific type of conflict. It could have been like, well, I could have taken it any number of ways and perceived it in my body in so many different ways. And so it can be a journey of exploring. And I think that requires grit and patience and faith because I think that sometimes we quit too soon. Maybe we're right there on the cusp and we quit and we stop trying. And you could have done that at any point in those 2 years, but you didn't. And then you got this massive reward um, from staying open.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's really amazing to, yeah, acknowledge the realness of that. And yeah, that it's not always an instant thing. Sometimes it is. Like I've worked with people and it's taken us one session to resolve their pain. But the flip side to that is that, yeah, sometimes it does take longer and there's layers. We've also got to remember, like, this was a conflict that I experienced when I was like 6. So we've got 30 years of the body and mind dealing with this, and probably lots of re-triggerings and layerings along the way as well. And so, can we expect to resolve 30 years of programming in a day or a session? Well,
Right.
sometimes, maybe, but often, maybe not. And there were layers to that journey, and I knew I was on the right track, but it had nuances. And this is something with German New Medicine is often we see, like, it's not a cut, like you said, it's not a cut and dry theme or process. There's often really subtle nuances in the programs and in the individual's experience. And to give you an example, something really interesting about this experience for me was that it wasn't actually the specific moment of like sexual trauma that was actually the DHS, the moment of DHS or the moment of shock for me. That's not actually what it was for me. It's not what you would have thought it was. For me, it was actually being walked home after. And I remember very, very clearly being absolutely petrified that my mum was going to find out about what had happened and I was going to be disowned. That
Mm.
was the massive conflict for me. It wasn't necessarily what had actually happened in the what most people would perceive to be the trauma moment. It was the feeling after. And it was when I started to resolve that piece that the biological program wrapped up. So yeah, it's like there's often layers and threads to this, and we just have to explore. And this is why it can be great to work with someone else, because sometimes other people can open up little boxes for us or ask questions or help us look through little windows and doors that maybe we wouldn't have seen ourselves from the perspective of where we were sitting.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, and I love that, and I think that's just so important to highlight because I do know that, like, I do know it can be so easy to just, like, try one thing, just go to, like you said, go to that point of trauma where you think it should be and then be like, "Oh, I resolved that, but I'm still sick, this doesn't work."
Yeah.
But we're giving up often just too soon in that regard.
Yeah, and sometimes we
Mhm.
really have to listen with the body instead of the mind. Like sometimes it's not an intellectual process. Sometimes we have to get really quiet and really still and listen to the subtle shifts or feel into the subtle shifts in the body. Like when we think about the event that we believe is connected to the symptoms, where really is that like feeling of ugh, where's the emotional holding, where's the emotional charge? It's not always where we think it might be. And so like I said, not necessarily an intellectual process. It's often getting to know ourselves. And again, we're back at superb self-awareness here. It's like really getting quiet and getting to know our bodies and noticing those subtle shifts, like where are the goosebumps, where's the tension, where's the emotional charge, where do we feel like crying, where do we feel angry, and yeah, hone in on those parts, from a
Mm,
feeling body rather than a thinking body.
absolutely. Mm, yep. You talked a lot about when you speak about the self-awareness and radical self-responsibility, and also when you did your fast, you said in the last couple days you cried and had a
Mm.
breakdown to a breakthrough, and you said you wrote everything down, everything that still charged you, everything that still triggered you, and you said this became your roadmap. And I've heard this term roadmap in the language of German New Medicine previously. So could you explain what you mean by roadmap?
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of two different contexts here, actually, but interestingly enough, intertwined as well. So, when we speak about German New Medicine being a roadmap, it's because German New Medicine it's not a modality, it's not a practice, it's not something we can use to resolve something in the psyche. It is a roadmap, it's a guidebook. So it gives us the very structured view of biological programs and symptoms and their relating themes. So it gives us the information about what's going on in the body and about what an individual has experienced in the way in which they perceived it and where in the biological program they are in relationship to, are they in conflict active phase? Are they in healing phase? That's the map, that's the guidebook, but it's not a modality. So then where we can use it is to map out what someone's experience has been like, and then use other modalities to help the individual create a resolution. And a resolution will always be created either in a practical real-time sense or in that perceptual change. Basically, the psyche has to be convinced that the original DHS or original shock is no longer a problem, and it won't be in the future. It has to be happy that that's finalized, and it doesn't need to adapt anymore to help us through that. So that's the German New Medicine roadmap piece. When I spoke about writing everything down at the end of my fast and that becoming a roadmap for me, I guess that was more along the lines of just acknowledging that everything that I was still holding on to in terms of emotional charges. And then I kind of used, not necessarily in a in a really it's not like I sat there and kind of ticked it off the list of this list that I wrote, but it definitely kind of sat there in my mind as all the things that I knew it was time to resolve, or it was time to let in the experience of and acknowledge the experience of and move forward from, or move forward
Mm.
with. That kind of became a roadmap for me to my personal evolution and my journey towards, a better state of health and happiness. So yeah, two kind of different roadmaps, but also related.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. So you explained how German New Medicine, Germanic healing knowledge is not a tool; it's not a modality, and I think that's so important because I think there's a lot of people that are just overwhelmed with all these different modalities and tools and programs and ways to do things or ways
Yeah.
to heal, and then they hear about this and they're like thinking it's just one more tool, and it's definitely, it's like I always say, no, it's like a body of knowledge, it's an understanding,
Yes.
and so within that, we can use an infinite number of tools or modalities to address the healing. Through your personal experience coaching and through your own personal life experience, what have you found to be the most supportive tools and modalities outside
Yeah.
of fasting? Because we know that that's a big one.
Yeah, for sure. And I will say that, not everyone in the Germany medicine world agrees with fasting either, by the
Hmm.
way. There
Yep.
is, that is a bit of an interesting topic because of the potential it has to set off, various programs if not monitored and guided properly. But anyway, back to the question. Modalities that I've found that are really useful in conjunction with Germany medicine as the roadmap. So, like I said, interesting that I studied my NLP practitioner certificate back in the day as a personal tool, because that has a massive place in the work I do now. So basically anything that can help with perceptual change is really, really helpful. So neurolinguistic programming, one that I've come across recently that I absolutely love and is phenomenal is the DeMartini method. So I have to say here, I am not a certified DeMartini facilitator, although it's on my bucket list coming up very shortly. Something I would next certification I'd love to do. However, there's a woman called Tanya Cross who I highly recommend at this point in time as a DeMartini facilitator. So the DeMartini method takes an individual through a set, like a step-by-step process to creating perceptual change of events that one might consider to be traumas or shocks. So that is a huge one. And the interesting thing is, I was already kind of integrating the principles and the questions that DeMartini method poses without actually knowing what it was, or prior to me actually even discovering DeMartini. So it was then interesting to come across DeMartini and see it put into a very structured step-by-step process. And I was like, oh, I'm kind of already asking some of these questions. That's cool. But yeah, DeMartini, highly recommend checking that out. Any sort of neurolinguistic programming processes where perceptual change is involved. And then, a lot of emotional expression and sort of psychological psychotherapy techniques in terms of acknowledgement of the current state, things like anger release techniques, just sometimes just letting someone cry about an event, like really helping them to cry deep, deep, deep sobs and tears and fully emotionally express what it was like to be them in that moment. I've seen just that go a long way to helping resolve programs purely by the sharing of that information. Because one of the things that Dr. Harmer said that was involved in creating this, DHS and biological program is a sense of isolation. So a sense that we are in this on our own. We have to deal with it on our own. We don't have support and help. So yeah, I've seen people come to a resolution purely by sharing and being given, not that we should ever have to be given permission to emotionally express, but some people do. Like, then this is a whole nother topic on like the good girl syndrome, right? And the patriarchal society that's told us that we shouldn't cry and that anger is bad and all these different things. So sometimes when somebody's given like a little nudge or permission slip to actually fully express their anger or fully express their grief, that can go a long way towards a resolution. There are some people that use things like hypnosis. I sort of tend not to go towards that because hypnosis, I find, is a more unconscious change. So it might work for a period of time, but because the change hasn't been made in the person's conscious perception, then we run the risk of having like tracks and triggers as well. So they might be put on, they might re-experience the event and then the program starts again, if that makes sense. So even though I'm certified in hypnosis, it's not one I tend to use a lot. I would generally prefer to help the candidate come to a conscious understanding and conscious change of what's going on. And then a lot of it that I work with, to be honest, is quite intuitive. Like it's just having people speak to different parts of their body, rearrange the way that they see an event. I will integrate like little bits of breath work and somatic release and all these different tools. Lots of people use things like kinesiology, can be really powerful as well. But yeah, that, like you said, there's kind of an infinite toolbox, and it's really about what the specific individual needs and responds best to.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Yeah, lots of tools. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I was thinking maybe we could spend a few minutes just maybe addressing some of the most common chronic symptoms that show up in the community. And maybe just, and I know it's obviously like, especially what we just talked about, it's complex, like how we talked about the 2 years of you finding the right, getting down to the nitty gritty and finding the real moment that was the conflict shock. Um, so I understand it's like super complex, but if there is somebody who's listening and they just really are genuinely not in a place financially where they can afford support with like a one-on-one practitioner, and they want some practical tools on how they could begin to inquire into what's going on in their body on their own, maybe we can just do a couple examples of ways that people can self-support.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, the thing is, like with perceptual change, effectively, you can, like anyone can teach themselves perceptual change. Get that word out of my mouth. Anyone can really teach themselves that and come to that. We just need to be open-minded and be willing. Again, we're back here at the radical self-responsibility. Are we willing to be open to changing our minds about an event? And so just even some questions that I ask, that we can all ask ourselves if we're able to find that moment of conflict. Some really simple questions that can be super beneficial are things like, how is this event, or how is it that this event happened for me rather than to me? Where was the benefit, value, learning, and growth in this event? if this event, if I was watching this event play out with, say, my best friend, how would I have perceived it differently as to, how I experienced it? Would it mean something different if I was looking at it from an outside perspective? And then, when we come to things like, so one of the most common ones is those musculoskeletal system, chronic pain, which is that self-devaluation conflict. And so a big one, a question I often ask people is like, okay, so if this was your best friend or your daughter or your loved one in this event, would you say the same thing to her as what you're saying to yourself right now? Because a lot of it is like, oh man, like I didn't do well enough in that event, or I really screwed that up, or I wasn't good enough there. And I'm like, well, if you watched your best friend go through that event, is that how you'd be speaking to her? And like 99 times out of 100, the answer is no. And I'm like, okay, so then why you? So, just some questions like that we can start asking ourselves. And really, it's all down to perceptual change. What's another question? It's all along those lines: benefit, value, learning, and growth. How's this happening for me instead of to me? What would you say to your best friend? I'm just trying to rack my brains for how, like, where was my role? Where was my responsibility in creating this scenario? How might I have invited this event into my life for my greater good? Meaning is a big one. Like, what am I choosing to let this event mean about me? Or what else could it mean? Is a really big one for self-devaluation as well. And sort of one of my flagship quotes is that nothing means anything at all other than the meaning that we choose to attach to it. So if you can grasp that one as like